Yeah, I think canceled projects on their own, like for an established studio, are actually a sign that it's healthy. Like that if Square Enix started working on 5 games and 3 of them don't make it to market, that is that they are managing their capital in a way where they're saying, I don't need an idea to make it. If it's not turning out fun, we can quit. We set aside enough money to take X number of projects to this milestone, and then we were only going to let the strong one move on. And that's really cool. Unfortunately, like, they had to do that like right out of the gate. So like it's a little scarier when somebody has no, it's not like, oh, we're doing it because they know what a good game is. They don't know what any game is. They haven't released anything. So I do think there is like some natural unease with Amazon doing that like really early on. And their counterpoint to that has to be New World. Like, it has to be New World. So it's really great that New World is turning out to be healthier and healthier, because that's what starts to make those old kind of moments fade away.
Yeah.
The question, and now they're becoming a publisher, and they're turning out to do a decent job at publishing. Like, people seem largely happy with the things that they're frustrated about with Lost Ark. Anywhere I see frustrations, they're not on the publisher side of things. So as a publisher, Amazon's proven to be a very, very good publisher.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And yeah, the points that people like to throw at them, they're easy points that you can score online, but then when you like really dive into it, you're like, that actually doesn't really shake itself out. And the only thing that's going to get them out of that mindset Blue has is just continuing to make games and products. And I think one of the biggest pickups they have is the Tomb Raider series, because if they can deliver a real quality experience with that, they're going to have that baked in nostalgia. They have not had a nostalgia drip at all, especially with New World. That's why, like, when New World was set to launch, I was like, this game is going to struggle really hard for a couple years, because there is nothing that players can lean into and just say, oh, I've been playing every single player New World game, you know, since I was a kid. Oh my gosh, we get to explore this and look how amazing this is. You know, like, that is when you look at the MMOs outside of the first generation ones where people were just making up stuff as they go along. World of Warcraft is based off a franchise. Final Fantasy is obviously based off a franchise. Guild Wars is based off a franchise. Like, there's all of these things that have that extra connection. And so without that, like, New World was always going to struggle no matter what you threw at it. And the other side of it is that people don't yet know Amazon. And I think over the course in going into year 2 this fall, like, we're getting a bigger picture. And then now we're seeing them pick up Blue Protocol, Throne and Liberty. Those are going to be some interesting test cases. And right now, like, the fear mongering has shifted from hosting and publishing to censorship with Amazon devs, because that they're also picking up these very Korean and Japanese like properties. And so the conversation online right now is very heavily like in this concept of like, oh, censorship. They're censoring this, or they're doing this. And everything that I've personally found on that is all related to like, oh, that character is 13 years old in Japan, and they're kind of having a sexualized outfit. They're going to age him up and maybe dress him up a little bit more here in the Western version, which I don't have a problem with. Do you have any issues or concerns with censorship?
That's a big topic.
Yeah. Might be another
that's
one
a
for
really
another day.
big topic, because like, to say you don't have an issue with censorship is to say that nothing should ever be learned from or adjusted ever. That nothing, that like, as society moves forward, that we have to live with every past decision for all of time. And we would never, ever, ever say, I shouldn't have said it. I wish I'd said it differently. I know things now that I didn't know then, and I wish I could take it back. Like, that's, especially as we talk about remakes, remasters, all these things, bringing things to new markets that they've never been in, to be culturally aware, you know, well, it wasn't a problem when I was a kid. Is that true? Like, are you sure that it's just that the group that was affected wasn't allowed to say anything, or that you just laughed at that group when they complained and now we're going to try respecting them? Like, so censorship on its own, like, to say you would never, ever, ever be okay with any form of censorship seems crazy. On the other side of things,
if anybody was like, I'm 100% against all censorship, it's like, I would say we shouldn't teach kids about eugenics. Like, let's let them age up a little bit before we start talking about all our skeletons in the closet.
So I think on the other side of things, to then start saying, you know, corporations are going to start policing speech and all of that, and we're going to start seeing, like, you can't ever tackle any difficult concept in anything, or it needs to, you know, one person, it hurt their feelings. Like, I don't want there are people that argue like certain subjects shouldn't be talked about until they're age appropriate, and then in some like interviews when we get on some of these topics that get a little more politically charged, somebody will say like, so could they talk about it with your kid when they're like 17? Like, that's too young. Okay, well then at that point, like if 17 is too young, if 18 is too young, well, they're adults, at least here in the US. Like 17 is adult adjacent, 18, you are an adult in a lot of ways. So if you can't talk about it at 18, when can you talk about it? So at that point, it starts to say, well, then maybe, that's a little over censored, that something can never be talked about ever, ever, ever. It's like, well, you can't talk about it too close to an event that's too traumatic because that hurts the victims. You can't talk about it too far from an event because, dude, it's not even relevant.
Oh, come on. Yeah, we've
we
already
just
moved
can't
on.
talk about it ever. So like, when you talk about games censoring these subjects, whether they're changing outfits, whether they're tackling characters from historically underrepresented groups, whether they're changing the way a character talked from 20 years ago, you're like, that could probably have been done better. Like there's gonna be some of that. The question is, where's the line?
Right.
I think
that's always going to be something.
End, we can see the problems.
That's always going to be the battle, and that's where like when I was talking with a couple of people about this specific topic as it relates to the protocol online, I was like, this is the only reason this is bubbling up to the surface in such a fervency, especially on Reddit, is because there's really nothing else to talk about. There's no, like, we're still waiting for news. We're still waiting for these things. And so people are hyper fixating on hypotheticals, right? Like, oh, hypothetically, because they've changed the midriff on this thing, that means they're going to do all these other things. And that's just essentially what is happening. I'm not joking. Like, I wish I was, but I was just like, well, I mean, if they go and censor the game, I've got a deal for you guys. ExpressVPN, we've teamed up, got a link in the description. You can go play the Japanese version. Like, it's like, if that is the break all point for you, it's not like they're deleting the Japanese version, like that's still going to exist and be an option for players.
But if your argument against something is looking at examples, and then when we reference examples, you start having to pull examples from the future, then I don't know how you're not upset at everything all the time.
Right.
Like let's for now try to focus on like what have they censored thus far. And to this point, everything that has announced and been announced so far has been bringing a game's content within the rating boards that are regionally appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Like, that just doesn't seem like the hill to die on. Like, if that's where we're going to get upset, then I don't know how we can ever play anything.
I mean, that's the conclusion. I think that if you would live and breathe on Reddit and online, that ultimately is the conclusion that nobody follows.
Like, there was a bunch of books that started getting removed here in the United States at the behest of a publisher. Like that like the people who are in charge of whether or not, like, they're the ones who make money if it sells. So like, they said, I don't want to sell this in its unmodified state anymore. And people were like, well, if they do that, they're going to go take away every book from our childhood. Based on what? Like, based on what evidence? Like, then let's get mad about that when they do that. But that's not what they did. They said, there are some books that are extreme examples. We'd like to change those as the people that own it. So if it's at behest of the game developer, so if the game developer says, hey, can you help me make this regionally appropriate? I've built a game for X region. Can you help me make sure that I'm not going to run into issues as we make this more of a global release? Great. Then Amazon's off the hook. They are doing what the game developer asked for. If, on the other hand, they are taking the most extreme examples and they are only tackling those, then that isn't a reason to get mad. And people argue slippery slope at that point.
Mm-hmm. But
like, you're not slipping yet. Like, it's not like, oh, well, they first did this and then 6 weeks later they did this and then 6 weeks. That's a slippery slope. But a slippery slope's not like the first change. It's like, oh, well, they did 1, so therefore they're going to do 30. I don't know about that. Like, that's a bit of a jump for me.
Sounds like a slow news day.
Like, which maybe that's what it is. Like, right now, Final Fantasy as a community has been arguing over some really slow news day stuff.
Some chairs, right?
And so, like, maybe that's it. Maybe when we get to the point that the worst thing going on in gaming is that we're not getting to see as many teenage belly buttons as a certain group wants to see, like, great, then we have solved gaming. Like, if gaming is so good that you're arguing about whether or not you should be able to see teenage cartoon belly buttons, like, things are going great.
That's a life with very little real problems in my mind. Now, before we talk about Diablo, I know we've been teasing it all through. Jim Jones in chat writes this. I'm going to get Chris's opinion. If we have to talk about Diablo, we can push that to another day too. For me, Amazon has the Google reputation. They have this massive graveyard of failed and canceled projects like Blue Set. Now, this is in reference to a comment that we were talking about earlier. It's hard to wonder, even if they have a success, if they won't screw it up later. Now, when I read this comment, like, I would just be kind of curious. I'm not registering a list of failed like Amazon projects. Yes, they exist, right? Like, you could almost call maybe Twitch a failed project, and then they're trying to generate more revenue. We'll see if that works out for Twitch, but like, I don't equate what Amazon's done to what Google has done. And I think for me, when I see a lot of people like try to hit Amazon and New World, they try to hit them with like mistakes that EA has made and Ubisoft has made and even Google has made. And I'm just like, I haven't seen that kind of pattern within that company. I'd like to see your thoughts, and if Jim wants to weigh in and share any kind of clarification about this graveyard, like, I'm not aware of it.
I mean, businesses have graveyards. Any long-running business made choices that seemed like a good idea at the time and didn't work out. Right? You run a sandwich shop, you try a new sandwich, it doesn't sell, you take it off the menu. You try another new sandwich, it does sell, it stays on the menu. If you're around long enough, you're going to have a bunch of people that said, I remember when they tried this one sandwich this one summer, it was so good, I'm bummed that didn't make it. Like, that's fine. Google has a reputation for like selling tacos at their sandwich shop and saying like, now we're a taco shop, and then getting rid of the tacos. And you're like, I don't even know who you are anymore. So like, it's really hard to keep your finger on the pulse of Google, because they have come out with a lot of stuff that were not in their wheelhouse and then canceled those. So that's a little bit different. Amazon is a big, diverse company, so there are parallels between Amazon and Google that make sense.
Yeah.
In that, like, you think of Amazon for their distribution of stuff to your, I ordered something and 30 minutes later it's on my doorstep. That's Amazon. And yet you think of Twitch, that's Amazon. But as far as failed projects, I would say that Amazon is very good at making money on everything they do. They let things have a long life before they cancel them for not making money, but they will eventually cancel them for not making money. That's the one thing that I see them do consistently, but they're willing to lose money to make money. They're willing to lose money to take market share. They're willing to lose money to learn and experiment, but those are always ends, like, towards the mean, like means towards the ends. So I don't see them as having a list of big, like, failed projects that like were going to be good and they just didn't stay with them. Mm-hmm. They don't have 100% perfect picks, but as soon as something gets legs under it, they seem to take it really far. I mean, Twitch has been given an enormous amount of latitude to try things, and people argue everything Twitch does is for money, but then they ignore. You have to remove all sorts of data from the data set to get to that conclusion. You have to ignore follower modes. You have to ignore all this stuff about making sure that you can not accept hate raids. You have to ignore all this stuff that starts to, like, you have to just remove feature after feature after feature and go, see, all that's left is things that make money. Sure.
Oh, yeah.
So has Amazon done some distasteful things over the years? Yes. Google diapers.com, and you can just be madder today than you were earlier. Like, you can absolutely see areas that Amazon as a company has frustrated people, and they've earned that. But I don't think it's from canceling projects. I think it's from business practices that within the realm of legality have allowed them to, like, push people who were in business out of business, or push them to the point that Amazon was allowed to buy them for pennies on the dollar. Like, they've been bullies, but I don't think they've been known for canceling projects.
Within the gaming space, they had a couple like announcements that they have canceled, and I think essentially what the lesson that I would say that they have learned from that is to stop announcing projects. It's like, hey, work on the projects, and if it's not coming together, like, don't announce it. That's actually the thing with Riot's MMO. Like, we were talking about Ghostcrawler leaving earlier. Like, we don't know anything about that except that they have an MMO and other multiple genres of games that they're working on as a company.
But if they hadn't talked about it, it wouldn't have been news.
Right. And I think essentially, like, the initial startup is, hey, we're working on all these different games. That in and of itself is what probably leads into Jim's kind of, viewpoint here, where they're coming from canceled projects. And it's like, okay, yeah, those probably, like, they might have sound good on paper. And that's one of the things, like Riot's MMO is the perfect MMO. It is everybody's, like, you go and you just poll the vast majority of people and they will say Riot's MMO. That could be, that's the one that you know nothing about because it's perfect in your mind. And so gamers have that mindset. As soon as we start learning about it, it could fall into like, wow, they are really doing everything right. Or it starts to run up against the theoretical MMO that you've built in your head, you know, and that starts a conflict. That's why right now you're seeing so much more drama within the Ashes of Creation community, despite that game still being years and years away. I wish it went, like, I kind of feel like I wish it well. Like, I really want it to be good. Like, everything on paper sounds like that could be a lot of fun, but it's always like everything about Ashes is always followed by a big ass butt, man. And that's just the way it goes right now. Jim Lissy here, like, he's clarifying some things.
I have no doubt they've canceled games. I have no doubt Square Enix has canceled games. I know for a fact Blizzard has canceled games. Canceling games seems to be par for the course. Mm-hmm. The question is, like, are they giving up on projects that don't deserve to be given up on, right? There was a lot wrong with Anthem before it failed. It's not like it's, you know, so I know there are people that like the concept. There was a core of good. There was a core of good, and then it was like, okay, they got to work on all this other stuff. It's like, oh, come on, guys, y'all can do it. And then, you know, EA was like, thanks for the money, because Anthem was like one of the #1 selling games. Like, it was a massive profit center for them. I'm assuming that, you know, after the 7 years of pre-production development, all that stuff. Now, Jim's clarifying on talking about Lumberyard, how it's been difficult to work with. Yeah, I've definitely heard that as well. What's interesting is they've also gone to Unreal Engine 5. So some of the projects that they haven't started actually talking about are on Unreal Engine 5 that the team there are working on internally. So honestly, at the end of the day, all I ask is you learn and you don't make the same mistakes, right? If the next MMO that they launch is in a state like New World is, you know, was in at launch, and they didn't like talk to the team and say, hey, what are the pain points that y'all wish that you could go and do differently at this before the start? Like, if they don't do that, then I'm going to actually start to be concerned for Amazon. But I'm not, because that's one of the things that they're doing. Like, that's one of the things I loved about Square Enix's Fan Fest. Every freaking year, like every time you have a problem, that next time, not a problem. We learned, we adapted, we addressed it, we fixed it, and we move forward. And that's essentially what I'm looking at with Amazon. Like, it's like, it really. My bigger concerns are like, company-wide, Amazon has been very anti-union. They feel that they take good enough care of their employees, and that they don't want their employees to have to introduce a third party in to muck that up. But when you hear the employee side of things, it sounds a little bit different. And so my bigger concern is, like, are the devs being treated fairly as we talk about unionization being a growing topic inside gaming? Like, I have concerns for Amazon. If we're just going to sit around and be like, okay, can we think of our 5 biggest concerns for Amazon? Yeah. Sure. Canceling projects is not one of them.
Yeah. And what we will do, being that this has been a fun conversation, lots of little points. And so just to chat, thank y'all so much for weighing in, and kind of like one of the things that we want to do with this Mondays and Tuesdays. We'll move with our Diablo 4 discussion. And if you guys have other topics like in this vein, like, you can sound off in the comments, hit us up on Discord. I try to plan these shows out, and we can have a really good time with it. So thank y'all.